Hello and welcome to the Taking Care of Cancer podcast from the Clatterbridge Cancer Centre NHS Foundation Trust. And I'm Caroline Kenyon, and I'm delighted to welcome two guests to our studio in person, and also a special guest who's joining us online from America, Kevin Beckett. Hello, you're going to have to tell us where you are and a little bit about what you're doing there as well, because we're all going to be quite jealous.
I'm actually in Barbados, which is in the Caribbean, and I'm head of oil and gas for a telco out here. So I have the misfortune to have to live in the Caribbean full time.
Well, you haven't got much sympathy from us on that one, but thank you so much for joining us and making sure the time gap isn't an issue. So we're here today to talk about cancer care near the end of life, and we want to hear your particular story, Kevin, but before we start, I'm going to introduce Claire Cadwallader and Lorraine Soudani. And usually when we start a podcast episode, we ask people to introduce themselves. But today we've got a really special thing going on because Claire and Lorraine are twin sisters, which is unusual, doing different jobs at Clatterbridge. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask Lorraine to introduce Claire and Claire to introduce Lorraine. Who would like to go first?
There you go. So I'll go first. So this is Claire. Claire is my twin sister. And I've gone first because I'm the eldest, so which makes Claire the youngest. So I elbowed my way out first. But Claire's caught up with me and, elbowed her way back up that ladder. So Claire is followed a different career pathway to me. She finished school, university, and went travelling the world. She was an engineer and then thought, I quite like what Lorraine's doing. So 18 years ago, thought, I'll be a nurse too. So Claire headed off to do a nurse training and carried on her career at Clatterbridge, which is where she's now. Claire is a brilliant cook. She's an amazing cook. I'm not, but why do I need to be? Because Claire's a good cook and does all the cooking and the baking. So Christmas Day is always round at Claire's house. What else?
What's Claire's title now? What is her job title?
So Claire is a Macmillan palliative care clinical nurse specialist.
That was a very rounded description, Claire. So you're going to have to do the same now. So who do we have on my right?
So we have Lorraine. Lorraine's my older sister, which I quite like. When we were younger, I used to really hate it. I used to make her stand in the garden. I remember Dad saying to me, why is she stood in the garden? I said, well, if she stands still for 2 minutes, I'll catch up. If she just doesn't move or doesn't breathe for 2 minutes, then I'll be the same age as her. And no one will say she's the oldest. But now I quite like it. Like Lorraine said, I had a different pathway, but I caught Lorraine up in the end with being a nurse. Lorraine started off nursing in 1989, and so went straight into nursing school and worked in St Helens and then went down to Brighton. But she's always worked in sort of cancer as well. So, but then Lorraine came back up to the northwest about 10 years ago or longer. 2008. Oh gosh, so 16 years ago, and then we suddenly started working together at Clatterbridge about 5 years ago. Yeah, is it 5 years ago? 4 years. 4 or 5, yeah. So we'd never worked together before. So Lorraine is a Macmillan Information Centre lead. And so even though we work in the same hospital, our paths cross professionally occasionally, but we try not to pass too often occasionally. And we don't often see each other in work a lot of the time, do we? But no, I work more with the teams that you work with than together, don't we? So, yeah. So Lorraine loves going out to shows with her son. I can't think of anything worse. I do all the cooking and things like that, but Lorraine's more social and much more outgoing than I do. Lorraine takes care of family problems, family business and everything like that, and I don't.
So there you are. You see insight into two key members of staff at Clatterbridge. So thank you both. That was wonderful. So much better than if I was introducing you. We're going to hear more about what you do and your role in supporting not just patients but also relatives like Kevin. And I think first, Kevin, we'd love to hear from you. You have had a roller coaster of an experience, haven't you, with your beloved wife, Sandra, who sadly passed away last May. Yeah. Is that right? And that was breast cancer, wasn't it? You can start off just by telling us about Sandra. What was she like?
Sandra, whirlwind. She was first and foremost, she was an educator. So she was a headmistress And then after a diagnosis when it came back, it metastasized in 2016. She went from being a headmistress to a lecturer in Liverpool Hope University. So she basically taught the teachers how to become teachers, and ran their professional development courses for them. So she was, first and foremost, she was an educator, and a brilliant mum and a superb wife, who, she was a special individual and had a great relationship with the teams in Clatterbridge, who were superb from start to finish, right the way through our journey.
And she was busy running a girls' boarding school, I think, wasn't she, when she was first diagnosed? And she went through surgery and chemotherapy.
Yeah, so she got diagnosed in 2006 in Royal Berks, and we managed to find a Scouser surgeon, Brendan Smith. So unfortunately, he supported Man United, but he was still a Scouser, which is great. And then she went through bilateral mastectomy, oophorectomy, axial node clearance, the whole 9 yards, and everything was okay until 2015, 16 when it came back. She was senior mistress in Downhouse School in Berkshire, you might have heard of, which was the one that Kate Middleton was at before she moved to Marlborough. She got bullied there apparently, but Sandra was senior mistress there slightly after those days. But and then we moved up to North Yorkshire then, where she was headmistress of Queen Mary's boarding school, and she loved it up there. She had 300 girls from age 4 to 18 who she used to look after, whether it be splashing through the river or on the back of a horse or doing all the academia involved.
And there came a point where she took a job in Abu Dhabi running a science school for Emiratis girls, you told me, and you were running a business in the UK, and then her cancer came back, which must have been absolutely devastating.
Yeah, it was a shock, to be fair. I think we'd been screened, and she'd had a full body scan in 2014, I think it was, and nothing showed up. And then one day she just felt a stiff neck, and unfortunately it was in T1 down to T4 and T1 to T3, and there was a bit in her lumbar spine as well. And we had the choice of either getting treated out in the Middle East, and to be fair, one of the surgeons there convinced us, he was from Birmingham actually, and he convinced us that it would have been better to get back to the UK, just because the hospitals are so disparate and far apart over there. So the travel would have been uncomfortable in terms of Sandra's pain when it was in her bones. So we came back to Aintree and then straight to the Walton Centre, and then they actually transferred us over to Clatterbridge on the Wirral, and what used to be the primary site, and we saw Doug Errington, I think it was, and then we were under the care of Sue O'Reilly then in the Royal, until she retired, and then we had the joy of working with Carlo Palmieri and Joe. So, and they really were unbelievable. But superb care right from the get-go, as far as Clatterbridge is concerned. And I always remember we had a conversation when Sam was in. She had a week-long course she was an inpatient for the radiotherapy on her bones. And, even in the face of adversity, the thing I loved most about the old Clatterbridge site was that everyone down to the porters went round with a smile on their face, trying to make it as comfortable as possible for everyone who was involved in that journey. So, nothing but good words to say about Clatterbridge as a whole. It's brilliant.
You were telling me about Carlo Palmieri when we had our call recently, and some special times and special support you got from him. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, first and foremost, because Sandra was a pharmacologist and did biology and chemistry, so she was really into the medical side because she'd obviously done pharmacology for a PhD, and so she was, I think, from a trial perspective, Carlo kind of saw her as a guinea pig because she was willing to go do anything if it helped others, and I think that whole, it tied in well with her education piece and the learning bit, and they did some really great work together, and she went down to London last January, only a couple of months before she passed, and got some funding for some further trials from NHS England with Carlo and Dan. And yeah, Carlo was just, he's a mad individual who's really, really special. And we had a great relationship with him and with Joe. You know, they knew what we were going through. They knew we were both relatively young, and you know, life doesn't deal that great deck of cards to you sometimes, but we both wanted to just roll our sleeves up and try and help. So, you know, I did a couple of marathons and raised some money, and you know, we've just tried to do our bit and give a bit back right from the start of the journey, to be honest.
We should say who Carlo Palmieri is as well, shouldn't we? Not everybody will have heard of him, although a lot of people will have. So what was his role?
So he was a professor for oncology, but also he led all the clinical trials for breast cancer, looking after on a weekly basis. As I say, I can't speak highly enough about him. He's genius. I loved him.
So we want to hear more about the support that's available to patients and families at Clatterbridge, which is why we've got Claire and Lorraine with us. Claire's a specialist nurse. She wasn't Sandra's specialist nurse, but you did have somebody who was supporting you in a very special way, wasn't she?
So Jo Francis was Sandra's metastatic nurse, and Sandra and her had a good relationship throughout the tenure of her treatment. We felt that she just really looked after us all the way through from a diagnosis right until the end. So much so that after Sandra had passed, we actually nominated Jo for a Star Award, which she subsequently won.
Isn't that amazing? So Claire, you're another specialist nurse. What does that make you feel when listening to Kevin talk about Jo?
I mean, and Jo's a very good colleague of mine, and I think as a specialist nurses, we're in a really privileged position because we have got that bit more time than some of the consultants as well, and we all work really well alongside each other and support each other by supporting the patients too. So, no, Jo's a very special person, and I think it's amazing to hear what she does, and I think I know what she does, but to hear you talk about her is really lovely too, because it's different as a colleague, isn't it? But no, I think specialist nurses are in a unique position, and we get to know patients really well and can support them at different times when they need us. So, yeah, it's a very privileged job that we do, yeah. It
sounds very personal as well from what Kevin was saying.
It is, you know, and you do build up relationships, you know, and patients get to know you, they know, so I've done a clinic this morning and a few repeat patients on there, and they know what I'm going to ask them, they know, right, I've got some questions for you, and then they'll say, well, Gal, you know, what are you up to? And so it's really nice, you do get a really good relationship, because you do have to give a little bit of yourself as well, you know, because we're all human, so you do have to give a little bit of yourself over to everybody too. But no, it's, it's a good job, it's a nice job. It can be a hard job as well, so I think Jo probably found it very hard alongside you as well, you know, seeing things, but but we do have a very nice job and a very privileged job too.
Hard in the sense of sharing Kevin and Sandra's pain, anxiety, stress, all of that?
All of that, yeah. Because, you know, because we can see a lot of patients in the week too, you know, so, so, you know, I think this week I'll have probably seen about 50 patients, you know, so it can be a very long week, but yeah.
But obviously some relationships are particularly special.
Yes, they are, yeah, they are. And like some patients need need you sometimes and they might not at others, and people dip in and out and see you too. So, and it's really good that people access support at the time that they're ready to access support. That's really good. It's making sure that people know what's available, and come and find you when they do want it. You try not to invade people's lives as well. So, because they have to go away and get on with their lives too, and but it's just making sure that they know that you're there and what's available. Yeah.
Kevin, you've told me about your family and the support and the fantastic way they were there for you throughout. And so I don't think you went to Lorraine, for instance, for support. But Lorraine, you do provide this, your team provide an amazing support to patients and families who need it. So can you tell us about that? If Kevin had gone to you, what would he have experienced?
I think Kevin talks about we, which I think is lovely. And so as a drop-in centre, so we support anybody. It can be our healthcare staff, patients, relatives, carers, friends, anybody that needs that help or support. They can just drop into us and we've got the time. Like Claire said, I think we're in an even more unique position or fortunate position with our time, because we have got time to spend with people. We don't have appointments, so we're not constrained by that time limit. And sometimes it's hard to get people to talk about we, because they want to talk about the patient, and they want the patient to come in and talk about themselves and their partner or their loved one, their carer. It's often difficult for them to join in because they don't want to make it about themselves, but actually it is about them too, because you need to work together, to be able to support each other, because you both have different needs. So hearing you talk as we, I think is really lovely. So as a drop-in centre, we will offer that support. We'll offer the time to people to listen. And sometimes people just want to talk to somebody that isn't a family member. So they can have the conversations with the healthcare professionals. They can talk about the medical things, but the things that they, are really important and matter to them, they sometimes don't feel they can have those conversations. So they'll come and have those conversations with us. And then that will lead us into the advanced care planning, which actually is Claire's area. Patients will come in and start to talk about things that are important to them, and how do they record that? How do they tell people that? And then we can start to have those conversations and build on them. But we've been educated on advanced care planning by Claire, as it happens. So that's where we do have that crossover in our roles. And we can talk to patients about anything. So it could be they're worried about their finances. They might need some additional emotional support. They might need some practical help at home. So it's coordinating that and signposting them to the right people to give them that support. But we have that time to spend and to listen, and to understand what's important to the patient, their family. So it would be Sandra, Kevin, and the rest of the family, or anybody that's involved during that time.
There are logistics, as you mentioned, in advanced care planning, but it'd be good to hear from you as professionals and also from Kevin and his experience. What people need to do and also think about when you're in that last stage of care, when someone's terminally ill. So, there's a practical side, but there's also what you say to your family and people around you. So how do you advise people at that late stage?
What we try and advise is people do things as early as possible. But of course, we're all very different as human beings. Some people are really good planners, and some people do things last minute. But also, like Kevin said, you're at different stages of your life. They're very busy. I'm just sat in awe at listening to both of your careers and about, what you were both doing in Abu Dhabi, and how that you were all, leading these really busy lives. And sometimes we don't think that far ahead about planning for the future, because you're living for the here and now, and so, but what we try and say is, look, we should all plan for the future at any point in our lives. So in your 20s, your plan in your 20s will be very different to your plan in your 30s, 40s, 50s. And if we think about it sort of logically, in our 20s, well, you started paying your NHS pension when you were 19, So you'd really started planning for your retirement at that point, but we don't see it like that at all. And so what we try and do, is to encourage people to start planning as early as possible, so that it's not seen as a big chore and it's not seen as something frightening. So Lorraine said people will drop in to talk to them about the things they're frightened about, because sometimes they don't want to bother their families. And also families and even some healthcare professionals can see it as quite a sad thing to do, and, and not a positive thing to do if the people want to talk about the future. But lots of people do. And I'm not sure, Kevin, did you plan for the future? Did you have conversations about the future? How did you both approach it?
We had because Sandra was uber organised about it all, and we had conversations. But I will say, and from my perspective, I had my head up my backside, like properly in denial, because she's on all these clinical trials, and we just seemed to just keep on getting extra options, and it didn't really help with the, you got a prognosis to say 18 months, and then all of a sudden we get a scan report and all the tumours have gone out of a lungs, or totally shrunk out of a liver, etc. And it felt like this false. I got to a stage after about 2 years where I was like, is this woman Superwoman? And I suppose looking back on it now in hindsight, it didn't help me prepare, because we got to last January, like it wasn't in a brain or anything. And I look back now at the trigger signs. There was 2 trigger signs. One, we went out for dinner for Valentine's Day last year, and she apologised to the maitre d' for being rude, and she hadn't been rude at all. But there was obviously something going on in her brain, and we didn't realise that that's what it was. And I was speaking to Joe literally on a weekly basis. Everyone was okay, and then she never missed a scan, ever, ever, ever. And she missed the scan at the end of February. Joe and I are convinced she knew what was going on and didn't want to confront it. And then she came back out to Barbados. I'd have come back home. We always said the plan was, as soon as we knew, we had 3-6 months, I'd drop everything. And work knew about the situation. They were all absolutely brilliant about it. But she just loved coming out here and sitting on the sun lounger and in a nice, looking at the beach and stuff. And she just kept it to herself. And they were the telltime things that I didn't pick up on. So did we plan? She did, definitely, because I found all the lists afterwards on the computer.
Yeah.
But we didn't. We kind of discussed the funeral twice. That was it. But we knew it. Me and the kids knew it inside out. So we knew what we had to do. We knew what the drill was for that. But yeah, as I say, I think I was in denial. If I'm being brutally honest.
And that's absolutely fine too, because when you're in the middle of everything and all the treatments and things, that's what happens, isn't it? You're just concentrating on that next scan. And I think you said to patients sometimes it's really hard to live, isn't it? Sometimes with all that going on. I've heard you say that about planning. It's so it can be a really hard thing to do. But it's incredible that she put lists on the computer for you. So she knew you all. She knew exactly what was going on. And this is what we say to people. We don't make advanced care plans for people. We can advise people about what to do and how to write things down. But these are really personal plans, and nobody knows their family better than the person in it. So she'd done it all in her own way, hadn't she? But then she also knew that actually she didn't want to upset you either or worry you if she's, and so she knew so she was, yes, she was taking care of you, wasn't she, right to the last minute.
She was being a control freak, which is what she spent her life doing.
And you don't change. It doesn't change. If anything, what we say sort of towards the end of life, those traits that we all have, people think, oh, somebody might get sort of, maybe not as organised or maybe not as bossy or, calmer or whatever. They don't, they heighten, they actually get worse, and good on people as well. I think, personalities shine more, I think, at that point. So, and like I said, everybody has their own way of doing things. So she clearly knew what was going on, but again, she did it her own way, and that's what everybody should do.
And that's advanced care planning, isn't it? It's about, Claire always talks about, she asks the patients, and she's taught us to say, what matters to you? So it's not about what's important to us or about what we think might be important to the person in front of us. It's about what matters to them. And how they communicate that to people is going to be different for everybody. So sometimes people think, I've got to sit down with a pen and paper and write my will about my finances. But actually it's so much more than that. That might be what matters to them, but it's about all the other things that that they want people to know.
What about how you share bad news? You know, when you knew Kevin, or when Sandra knew, you know, whoever was first to know, how do you share that bad news? And is there any kind of right way to do it? I mean, how did it happen for you?
I think first and foremost, the quickest thing I learned was it was Sandra's news. It wasn't my news. It wasn't my position to be telling people. But I'd always go and tell people with her. I'd never say my parents or whatever. Sam wanted to speak to them, the kids, obviously her mum and dad and stuff. But yeah, I quickly cottoned onto that she wanted to control the narrative of, and also not getting carried away with stuff, right? So just because we had a clear scan, it didn't mean we had to get the champagne out, etc., etc. So we just needed to, I just needed to follow her lead, basically. And with the kids, it was very much just containing the emotion as much as anything, especially in those, those early days of the metastatic stuff when it's all doom and gloom and they're telling us 18 months and we weren't in the process and we didn't know how Sam's body would react to the drugs, etc., etc. We just had to be really careful with them, and I just followed Sandra's lead as much as possible on that.
Okay. So there's no right or wrong, really.
Absolutely not. And it's about following the person's lead, because lots of people just don't want to be defined by a diagnosis of anything. They want people to remember, actually, I am a wife, I am a mum, and this is my job, and this is my friends, and this is what I do. And so they don't want people to look at them in a different way either, or to look at or feel sorry for them or be unwell. Is that how Sandra was? She just wanted to be herself and carry on and do the things that she loved.
Yeah, and then there'd be times just the two of us where, I think I saw her break down twice. That was it. She was a machine. But I knew the way she was reacting to stuff. Of course, she was worried, but she'd never let that mask down. Even with me, it'd be, you knew there was something wrong with it, etc., in terms of from an emotional perspective. But she very, very, very rarely let that mask down, because she wanted to be an example to her kids. She wanted to not have me worrying overtly. And I remember when she was literally a matter of days before she slipped out of consciousness at the end, she just looked at me and went, "Do not start crying all the time. Keep it together for the kids." And I was like, okay. And I'm blubbing. But that's just the way she was. She was very private, and she was just, it was her journey, and it was how she wanted to do it.
I wish I'd met her.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's even more to think about when the patient is a child or a young person, and we're going to break off now for a minute just to hear about the support given to young people living with incurable cancer from Laura Elder, who's teenage and young adult lead nurse. Laura, tell us what the difference is when you're treating teenagers and young adults.
Mm-hmm. So we look after young people who are aged between 16 and 24, and that age group is an age group that's undergoing a transitional time of life, growing into young adults, and they are often sort of the oldest in paediatric services and the youngest of adult services. So they're in that sort of transitional time of development and that transitional time of healthcare. So for that reason, we provide additional support and services to make sure that people get the right treatment and care at that time of life.
How different is it, the kind of service that a young person and their family will get compared to adults?
So the service that they get, I suppose, is the same as what they would get within adult services, but with sort of a supplementary teenage and young adult package on top of that. And much of our support is in terms of, I suppose, psychosocial support, in supporting people to develop into young adults and not be held back by a cancer diagnosis or cancer treatment as much as possible.
How different is your service from adults, from treating adults, when it comes to the end of life and nearing, and also dealing with bereavement? What extra support can you give?
Well, dealing with sort of young people who are end of life is very challenging for staff. You know, nobody wants to see young people come to the end of life and perhaps not necessarily have any more treatment options. So for staff, we have our psychologist who will offer one-to-one support, or, you know, if a young person has passed away on the ward, for example, they'll do like a debriefing session for staff and support people through in that way. And for families, we offer bereavement support after young people die as well, and much of that goes through our psychologist as well, but depending on other services that we might have linked in with as well. There's other sort of counselling services that come through our social work team and through the children's hospice that we link in with a lot as well, because some people don't realise that the children's hospice that we link in with does extend their full age range up to 24. You know, they think that they only take younger children, but they can offer support up to 24. And in doing so, because they are sort of young people focused, they have that more understanding of what might be appropriate for young people and families, perhaps than a young person going to an adult hospice. The message that we always sort of try and portray is, you know, make sure the young person's voice comes across, you know, and don't decide for the young person what may be best for them. You know, end-of-life conversations are very difficult, very sensitive, but, you know, to include a young person as much as they want to be, you know, it is the most important thing, really.
Kevin, looking back, is there anything you wish you'd done differently in terms of preparing for that last stage of care?
Yeah, I think so. Two things. We did the best in terms of our prime objective was get the mortgage paid off. That was what we always worked for. I think we saw each other every 4 weeks, I'd say. And I wish in the last 12 months I'd have jacked work for a bit earlier. But then the other bit was, I don't think we planned our end of life carefully enough in terms of hospice or dying at home, because we didn't think we were in that space. And by the time we got to having that conversation, it was kind of getting too late, and I didn't want to stress Sandra out with a move. And we ended up dying in Clatterbridge, but very much on a calculated move, because I again spoke with Joe on a daily basis and the nurses on the ward in Clatterbridge. But I think we didn't want to stress it out with new surroundings. And then by the time the very end came, it would have been, because you have to get your care packages. This is like, you know, the actual logistics side, right? We had to get the care packages sorted. And by the time, even though it's only 48 hours, we were on a ticking clock. We just kind of made the decision at the end was, do you know what, why don't we just make sure that we've got favourite Joe Malone candles and you know, smells and a music on and all that. And we basically made the side ward as comfortable as possible. And I'm glad we made that decision rather than to move her, even though a hospice would have been a lovely environment, etc. I don't think she'd have got the benefit, but in hindsight, I wish we'd have had that plan. And I've said it, I've said it a number of times, that I think we have this birth plan when we have children, down to the nth degree of what's going to happen when, and what, you know, I think we should do that more so when we're in a terminal diagnosis perspective of literally, when this happens, we're going to press these buttons and these triggers are going to happen. And I regret that we didn't do that, but we made the best of the situation and made sure she was peaceful and she was surrounded by her family, surrounded by love. And I think the key thing was a beloved pomegranate noir, Joe Malone. Smells.
Sandra's definitely my kind of lady. We share her Joe Malone pomegranate.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that you say that, you know, that you wish to plan that end of life a bit more carefully, and also and liken it to a birth plan, because that's how I teach. I liken an end of life care plan to a birth plan. And, you know, midwives make everybody do an intense birth plan. I've never had a baby, but, you know, I just hear that this is what happens. But actually, when it comes to sort of giving birth, it can go a bit awry, can't, you know, it can change. So what the best plans sometimes have to change at the end. And I think it sounds like that, you know, with all the best planning in the world, you know, things can go a little bit awry with care and, you know, even getting into a hospice and the beds available and, you know, but it sounds like she, you know, she was sort of comfortable with you all around her and all of those things, you know, and also staying in Clatterbridge as well. It's a place that she knew, and she knew all the staff and the staff knew her. And so sometimes you having that sort of, and you knew them as well, the family as well. You all knew that know the staff too. So sometimes that can be far more comforting than going to a place where nobody knows you, you know. But, and again, you know, you can call to visit the hospices and things, and, you know, and it might not have been for her either, you know. So actually, the plan that you made sounded incredible in the end, you know. And you can plan for everything, but sometimes things do change, you know.
In a way, to Sandra's comfort, she loved Carla would just whip down and talk to her.
Yes.
And so would Joe. So she loved that. Because she had said, to your point, that familiarity.
Yeah.
They were the two people who went into bat for her, if you like. And yeah, she found that really comforting up until, you know, while she was still conscious, etc.
Yeah. And also for you all seeing them as well, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so, but it is really hard to sort of, because, you know, you can write all these plans and things, but I think, you know, I always say to people, look, what we need to know about you is what do we need to know about you to best care for you, and what would I want somebody to know about me so that I could care for them. So I know what Lorraine wants, and she knows what I want. I've got a lovely husband, but goodness me, you know, he it would just all go a bit awry. You know, and so if you need somebody that knows you, so that, you know, having the candles, having the family there and making things as homely as possible is hugely important. You know, I'd want champagne mouthwashes and a window open and all kinds going through, and we're all so different in what we want. And as long, you know, and so she had a family with her and that knew everything about her, and that isn't to be underestimated at all. You know, so it was incredible to hear that what you did with, you know, for her, yeah, together.
There's a lot of support at this stage, isn't there, out there for patients and families if they need it.
Yeah.
And Lorraine, I know that you give support, but also you signpost patients and families to lots of organisations. There are probably too many to mention here. We will put some links in the podcast notes, but are there any in particular that you would highlight?
It depends on what the need is for the patient. So some people want one-to-one support, some people want group support, some people want face-to-face, some people online. So it's asking what the person needs at that time, and what support they have around them. Do they want somebody to go with them? Is it something they want to do on their own? So we'd see what the person we're talking to wants, how it, you know, the signposting, how it's going to help them. And then there are lots of organisations out there. There's Macmillan, there's Cruise, and there's the Good Grief Trust. So there are lots of organisations depending on what the best support is for the person that needs it.
Okay, thank you. Unless there's anything else you'd like to add at this point, I'm going to ask you for a final word, which means, do you have a particular message? This is what we ask our guests at the end of every episode. To listeners who were in Kevin's position a year ago, you know, what would be a message, advice, encouragement? I don't know, some things that you might say to people like you a year ago, Kevin.
I think from my perspective, it's obviously there's the personal journey with your family, etc. But just don't underestimate that the absolute 1,000,000% of care that goes on. And honestly, I cannot. That hospital is unbelievable, and I will keep on fundraising for it. I'm setting up a foundation as we speak. We've raised some money in Bermuda from the charity golf day in January, which will be coming through to the foundation. And that place is so special and incredible, to be honest.
It's wonderful. Well, the charity aren't here, but on their behalf, I'd say a huge thank you. Lorraine, what would you say?
For people to communicate with them, with their families, to communicate with us, to come and talk to us. We're here to listen to people, and listening is really important. And there's no question that we have never been asked before. There isn't a daft question. People have questions they're scared to ask, but we're there for them to come and ask us those questions. We won't necessarily give them the answers, but we'll help them to find the answers.
Thank you. Claire?
And sort of similarly, communicate with your families. Conversations are hard, but we have hard conversations every day of the week, and we kind of don't recognise that. And plan. Tell people what you want and what you don't want. Just you don't have to write it all down, but just as long as you've communicated it, and neither do it in a walk or a coffee shop, or not. You don't have to do it in a formal way over a glass of wine or whatever way you would do it. But communicate with people about what you want and what you don't want, and just and make sure that other people communicate that to healthcare professionals, so that we know early. And then when you do that, you get the best care. And I've got one story. Can I tell you one story?
Why not?
I just feel the best care that we ever gave a lady in the cancer centre was through COVID, when she had to come in without a family, and this lady couldn't speak, and she was in with us for 6 weeks. So what her daughter did was she wrote an A3 piece of paper, and she just titled it "My Mum." And on the top of it, she told us the most amazing things about how to care for her mum. And actually the opposite of how we would have cared for her in hospital. So things about her diet, things about the radio that she liked on at night and in the morning, the television programmes that she must watch, how she liked to sleep, and where the teddy bear needed to be, and what clothes she liked. And it was the simplest plan on the wall. And then she told us a little bit about her mum's life and her family. And we pinned that on the wall, and every healthcare professional that went into that room read it, and this lady got the most incredible care. And I think that if all of us had an A3 piece of paper and did that in our heads for ourselves, wherever we went, we could pass that on and we would get amazing care, because that's a really personal thing. So for me, write everything down, tell people what you want, and you'll get good care.
Fantastic tip. Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much, Claire Cadwallader, Lorraine Soudani, and most of all you, Kevin Beckett, joining us from Barbados. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story so soon, really, after you losing your beloved Sandra. So really appreciate that, and thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.